Welcome to Some Things Considered, the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity and we talk to cool people to find out what makes them tick. I'm your host, Sean Murphy. I'm an author. I direct the Center for Story at Shenandoah University, and I run the nonprofit 1455 Lit Arts. For more about me and what I do, check out seanmurphy.net. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Some Things Considered. This is the podcast where we are obsessed with story. We celebrate creativity. And my mission in life is to find interesting, cool people to find out what makes them tick. I am really thrilled and honored to be joined today by Walt Hunter. Let me read you his bio. And if you ever pay attention to this podcast, you'll immediately understand why I had to have him. And I'm so grateful that he accepted the invite.
It's great to be
Walt
here, Sean.
is Walt is a senior associate dean for the College of Arts and Sciences and a professor of 20th and 21st century literature in the Department of English at Case Western Reserve University. He is a fiction and poetry editor for The Atlantic. In addition to two books of literary criticism, Walt is also the author of a collection of poetry, Some Flowers. I mean, enough said, right? But Walt, absolute thrill to have you here. Thanks for joining.
Terrific to be here. Thanks so much for inviting me. I can't wait to talk.
Well, let's get right into it. So, I mean, just from that bio, there's a lot we can cover. But I think a good way to set the table is the recent piece that compelled me to reach out to you was "Stop Meeting the Students Where They Are," which appeared in the Atlantic, and I think it ties a lot of these threads together. So, maybe talk a little bit about your thesis, which manages to be both provocative but also incredibly refreshing in 2026.
I had this class in the fall of 25, the American Literature Survey, your bread and butter American Literature Survey. Of course, the way that we have it here is it's about 400 years, so it's quite. I think I described it as a bit of a dare in the essay. Over the course of teaching that class, I found myself thrilled at how much the students were excited to read, to talk about. I had set up the course in a way that I typically do, where I assign stuff that starts mid 1600s all the way up through the present. But I decided this time that I really would do entire texts at various points, and that included Walden by Thoreau, that included Song of Solomon by Toni Morrison, a couple other novels, and some whole long poems as well. And what I came to believe at the end of that course, or rather, what I came to kind of feel affirmed in believing, was that we really, as a profession, as a culture, as a nation, as a group of concerned parents, thinkers, bystanders, caregivers, we really need to trust that our students can take the challenge of reading difficult whole texts, and that is an essential. I hesitate to use the word skill for various reasons. It is a skill, but it's also a kind of an essential primary activity that humans should be able to do, enjoy, and grow into.
Yeah.
And so that was, that was kind of the basic point of the article. And the title of the article really refers to a sense that I have borrowed from my own experience, and a lot of the article is anecdotal. From my own experience, that I always appreciated when I was stymied and mystified by a book, and that really allowed me to kind of become a better, more resilient, more interested reader. I'm thinking long 19th century novels from my own experience, but I'm sure any philosopher or historian, would have their own choices there as well.
Yeah.
War and Peace was the book that came to mind. It's something I read far
Yeah.
too early to understand a lot of it.
Right. So thank you for that. And I encourage everyone, I mean, especially if you're an educator or concerned about some of these issues or hear people talking about it, check out the article. And it is like, I want to be clear, it's full stop. It's very encouraging. It's very refreshing. It's very positive, the fact that it's based on a true story. But I want to unpack a little bit how we got to this point. And I think what your piece does in such a affirming way is kind of answer the rhetorical question, why doesn't anyone read anymore? And kids don't read anymore. And I hear that all the time. I see it, but like yourself, and I do feel like I'm in the minority. I want to push back against that both philosophically and also I think what your piece argues is that we're selling ourselves and students, not to mention the culture short, if we just immediately concede, yeah, this is old stuff that doesn't matter and it's too hard. Because we don't say that about calculus, right? We don't say
Right.
that about learning to play the violin or trying to become a good athlete. Like it should be hard work, but how do we demystify that it can also be very rewarding on its own, not just as art for art's sake?
Yeah, you put it beautifully, Sean. And I think one common thread in the responses that I've gotten from a lot of middle school, high school teachers, college teachers, people who cared in general, is a feeling of I, I lack the agency to change how my school or how my administration is
Yeah.
compelling me to assign things. And and your piece kind of makes me think that we need to come up with a way of changing that. And I think that I did want to maybe shine a light on our common, I include myself here, a common sense of a lack of agency in, say, getting tech out of the classroom, which I feel very strongly about, in the sense of platforms that are adopted that have these little snippets of reading,
Yeah.
you know, I'm not saying there's necessarily anything nefarious at work here, but I don't think that serves
Yeah.
our students well. And I think that's what I heard in the response from a lot of so I think one way in which this has happened, where we've gotten to this point where we are surprised at the call for reading whole books, is is
Yeah.
is precisely because of the infiltration of these kind of technological driven platforms for reading that I don't think belong really in the classroom at all. Yeah.
Totally, and in fact, that leads me. One of the lines that I really appreciated from the piece. You say, "Why did they do what I asked? Because I asked them to and told them it was worth it." Okay, we covered that. I said that time was precious and we needed to take some of it back for ourselves, so we did. And to me, what I'm celebrating in this piece is that you helped me kind of crystallize the framing, right? And as storytellers, we want to be able to make our argument compelling. Everything right now, I mean, there's so many ways we could break down kind of late stage capitalist America, and go down a lot of rabbit holes. But I think everyone would agree that these apps, these businesses, these hobbies are all competing for your time. And
Right.
this notion of slowing down and reclaiming time because you deserve to, and it might actually bring you genuine fulfillment, almost seems radical in 2026.
We talk about an attention crisis, but really what we're talking about is an attention market. Our attention is being chopped up, bought, and sold. We haven't dramatically changed as a species. We can read long things. We're just being channeled into these short forms. I'm like everybody else. I love watching Instagram reels and sending them to my partner and laughing about them.
Yeah,
Short forms are delightful. I'm not saying
yeah,
that at all. But I
yeah,
think we are potentially misrecognizing what is going on when we say, oh, our attention spans have become so degraded and so much less than they were. No, no, no. We're presented with a set of options that we have every right to resist and say, these are not the only options for how I want to use my day. And I
yeah,
think that, reading is one of the ways in which I suddenly said to the students this semester, was like, take back
yeah,
some of that time that others are taking from you.
yeah.
And I put it a little combatively like that. Yeah, it's true.
Yeah, and I think even if you ask students or parents, I think based on my own experience, but I think it's safe to kind of assume that everyone would say, I want more personal time. I want
Yeah.
more personal space. So it's not that reading is the panacea per se, but it's like
Right.
that should be on the menu of options as something that we can say as educators. This has worked for centuries. So this is not a quick fix, but it is something that generations of human beings worldwide have found restorative, refreshing, inspirational, and selling it that way, I think undercuts. And it's not an original thought, but one of the things that I kind of bemoan is that one of the reasons I think humanities is under attack, and I mean for decades, not just in the last few years is in America, if you're not doing something that makes you money, it's almost like dismissed as a waste of time. And I
Right.
think that right there are headwinds that the arts are always going to struggle against. But how do we kind of reclaim some of that without it becoming a snobby, like, well, you'll be a better person? It's like the fact of the matter is you will be, but
Right.
this is more a matter of there are a lot of things in life that aren't going to make you money. In fact, might cost you money, but not only well, it might it bring you some relief and happiness. This is an investment on your intelligence and well-being down the road. That's the track I've used. I tell students, I if you get nothing else out of this class, just file away the possibility that you might not be ready for this book or this poem or this movie, but you might be ready for it later, and it'll be there for you whenever you're ready.
I couldn't agree more. You put it so well. And we don't train for a marathon because it's going to make us money. We don't go to the gym because it's going to make us money. And we
Yeah.
go to challenge ourselves to become better at an activity that is its own primary justification. And reading in some way is that. And sure, it might make you a better person. Sure, it might make you a worse person. There are different arguments on either side. I mean, I tend to think it does make you a more empathetic thoughtful person when you read books that have a wide panoply of characters doing things that you haven't done or have never experienced. I
Yeah.
think that the balance of my feeling is on that side of the argument there, and I think that does justify the humanities, especially in an age when empathy is under attack. But I also think there's something about the sheer training your mind into reading that's hard and rewarding because you become better at the activity of it. And there's all sorts of delightful things along the way.
Yeah. Well, you said something earlier that I have my big eureka moment I'm going to share with you, but like you just gave me a mini eureka moment while you were talking, and because you mentioned, and it's true, it's irrefutable. It's not even that people are not reading anymore. I think a case, and I'm sure there's data to back this up, young people might be probably reading more than ever. It's
Yeah,
just what are they reading? And I think
sure.
that gets to the notion of reclaiming, like, keep doing what you're doing.
Right.
Get your fix, get your, whatever you need, whatever these devices are doing for you. We all like can admit to finding joy in a YouTube video, but recognize that it's what you make a choice to read about, just like you make a choice to eat healthy. And I catch myself saying that, and I'm like, you're getting on the high horse, and it's not that, but it's more just recontextualizing, I think, the contours of the debate. And again, I don't want to say I am usually pushing back against people that blame AI, blame capitalism. It's like these are all part of it, but it's
Right.
more kind of this fundamental, like, why are young people so unhappy? Why is there more anxiety? Reading Tolstoy is not going to change that, but it's a reminder that slowing down and recognizing someone that spoke a different language in a different era feels exactly the way I do. There are moments where that's what builds empathy. It's not the magic act of reading, it's this engagement.
Yeah, and we shouldn't shy away from proselytizing that
Yeah.
to young people. I mean, the only reason I picked up the books I picked up was because I happened to walk into a classroom. It wasn't even my teacher, and he said, "Oh, have you ever read this? You might like to read this." He didn't know me from Adam at that point, and
Right.
that's really that's how I really got started. Now, I was already somebody who I admit liked to read,
Yeah.
but I read
Yeah.
anything that I could find, and it was often a lot of, trash. I mean,
Sure.
it wasn't high literature, and I
Yeah.
still read really widely across whatever I could read. So, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, Yeah, I mean, so your piece also I think is such a necessary reminder. Like I forgive me, but I in a very in a very ebullient way, I was reminded of Stand and Deliver, which I love the movie, it's well acted, but
Yeah.
it's this idea of course, if we assume the worst and we don't push each other, never mind students, of course that's a gesture that's going to end badly. But if we apply that combination of love and encouragement, we might build some enthusiasm, and younger people will find in themselves the capacity for capabilities they didn't realize they had. And I think that ties together, right? Not neatly, but it ties together the humanities being under assault and how everything flows downstream, empathy, attention, happiness. It's not the panacea, but it's like this has worked and it could work again, or it could make you reevaluate how you want to spend your time.
Yeah, totally. And the imagination, uh, the desire for wonder, joy, curiosity, the sense of judgment that you form when you can say, we should or we shouldn't be doing something as a culture. All this comes from reading carefully and talking about the reading and thinking. I've also been somewhat of a proselytizer for sort of inserting some contemplative activity into the day instead of making everything instrumentalized towards an action. I don't know. Maybe it's that partly a temperament thing, but I think that's important for our students to be well balanced and for ourselves as well.
Yeah. High fives all around, but I think we'd be remiss, and
Yeah.
I would expect pushback from some people if they said, okay, you just kind of glossed over the attention. I'm here to acknowledge, and in fact, I'll shout out, I want to make sure I get her name right. Rose Horowitz, one of your
Yeah.
colleagues, recently wrote a piece that I also had bookmarked about teaching film and how students are either having trouble or aren't able or willing to watch movies in a class about movies,
Right.
and that would have resonated, period. But my big eureka moment that I wanted to share was I was in a class a couple of years ago and kind of casually mentioned Goodfellas, but and not even as a movie, but like, well, this helped us understand blah blah blah. And I recognized the faces and I said, who has seen Goodfellas? Not a single hand went up. And I was basically like, well, you need to watch it. And it led to a these things happen in the classroom. It actually led to a wonderful, very frank discussion of the feedback that we don't really watch movies. And again, it was
Yeah.
general, it was small sample size, but what I took from that wasn't kind of a defensive, you poor dumb kids. It was more, okay, I'm hearing feedback saying we don't, that's not how we engage with content. And so I will confess, in less positive moments, I think if we can't sell Goodfellas, how are we going to sell Moby Dick? But I don't think
Right.
it's hopeless, but I think we do need to acknowledge that the attention thing is, or maybe the attention's the wrong word. It's we access content through a device and it's not really amenable to a novel or a movie on a big screen.
You make a great point. Rose is brilliant, and her research has been really, uh, invaluable for kind of diagnosing what's happening in
Yeah.
education in the country. I think, although I'm a relentless optimist about getting students to read novels and difficult poems, I
Yeah.
fully admit that probably what we have to do is offer a varied menu to students so they can try watching a long, difficult foreign movie with subtitles. They can read Moby Dick. And then we also, I found a lot of success with students of any age in teaching very short poems, and that is an opportunity not to necessarily give into the argument that attention spans have decreased, but actually to find a different way to focus attention because a short poem initially there might not seem to be much there, and then over time if you linger with it you do, it's a short form that repays an excess of attention. So it may very well be that a shorter movie form could pay dividends in getting students to attend really closely to the nuances of that short form without being a 2.5 hour feature movie. I don't know. I mean, there is probably I think probably variety is the key here, and helping students see the sheer beautiful multitude of kind of art making that is out there right now, both contemporary and in the past. I do insist on, I think, creating that difficult translation work of reading something very, very old. Um,
Yeah.
Even when students, as you say, are not willing to kind of grab Goodfellas off the there's not even a shelf more anymore.
I was,
Than I was, but
yeah.
that kind of cultural gulf between something, even in one's own language, that was written, say, in this, the 13th or 14th century, 15th, 16th century, just for that effect of encountering the unfamiliar, but still feeling like it's part of that tradition that you're writing in. I think I'm ranging off your topic, and let me pull myself back. I do think you're right. There is definitely a way in which our cultural forms have proliferated in the present into a variety of kind of scintillatingly interesting short forms, and we would be doing an injustice to students not to take up some of those short forms as well. So no, that might be how I would approach that, I guess.
Yeah. Well, so I'll go right to hopefully not cliche, but oft invoked. I'm old enough that I mean I lived through the ascendance of rap music, and I mean I remember both in terms of my peers and
Mhm.
adults. Like this is noise, this is nonsense. It was an aesthetic and it was a racial argument, but then and certainly now, what I tell students or people is like there's one place to start because that's better poetry than most of the stuff that I read in the glossy magazines. There are ways to celebrate the ways the language is evolving and looking and what you just said is I think is so true is that there can't, shouldn't, and probably never has been a one type approach to,
Right.
and I think back on I was never going to be a math guy. That just wasn't in the cards. But I know that bad teachers didn't help with the anxiety, with imagine having a math teacher say, we know you're not going to be, a calculus person, but we can have, this is why this is exciting. This is why, this will be something that you can take with you. Like, I guess what I'm getting at is I more often find fault with the complainers and the teachers that say, I can't get my students to read. And I really usually don't say it because I'm at a conference or something, but I'm like, what accountability are you taking? Are you infusing excitement? Are you showing enthusiasm? Are you asking them how they receive content and trying to find strategic ways in that are gateways to then we can tackle the wasteland or Emily Dickinson. But starting there, yeah, maybe that is a 20th century paradigm.
Maybe, and I do think a kind of collective depression has settled over many folks who are walking into a classroom and feeling, I'm not sure if this is what I did 10 years ago or what I wanted to do when I started out. I have had
Yeah.
to adjust myself to a set of changed expectations. Um, and to those folks, I would say, let us all together resist what is making us feel like our expectations have had to change, which is, again, the proliferation of these tech platforms in the classroom that say, oh, you can only offer these snippets that are, that are instrumentalized towards a test or just being truncated in order to fit an arbitrarily constrained time frame or whatever, And I do think, um, taking back our classrooms from whatever external corporate forces are making us feel like we can't teach books. I mean, and that, so what I would say, I suppose, is that I have shared that feeling at the college level. I have not taught at the high school level, or the middle school level. But I certainly have gotten responses that testify to a shared feeling of, we would love to be doing this, and now, can we find a way to do it? And at the same time, what we're having to do is really adjust our teaching to these platforms that we feel ambivalent about, or maybe in some sense support, but don't feel like there's an easy avenue to expel from the classroom. So yeah,
Yeah. Well, and the last thing I want to do is sound like I'm, blaming the victim and
yeah,
and
of
and
course.
taking teachers to task, but I do. I think it's a fair and perhaps overdue. I don't, I mean, my wife is a grade school teacher, and I've
Mhm.
seen since we've been together how fifth grade, like she is adapting her teaching style for fifth graders. So there's a certain kind of hubris, I think, for a middle school or college professor to say, this is how poetry has been taught, or this is how I've
Right.
taught it. There needs to be some accountability that one need not feel guilty, but I think the stakes are high enough where if it's not working anymore, is it the student's fault, or are there ways you could mix things up or do some earnest research, read pieces like you've written to get inspired and feel like maybe I ask the students like, how would we, read this book together and what's going to work? We're going to have to do it, but let's make it fun. I just feel like there is kind of this learned helplessness now that
Yeah.
seems to have gotten more pronounced. And again, there's all kinds of cultural and academic kind of bureaucratic reasons for it. We could talk about that. I just feel it's lazy. But
No,
what
no.
what can we do to motivate or encourage, teachers and fans to make this not sound like it's a useless, worthless endeavor?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I realized that I do, and I talk about this a little in their article, is, and this is not an option for everybody, nor are a lot of things I mentioned in the article. I
Yeah,
totally recognize that. But one of the things that I had to do in the college level is really eliminate the out of class writing, and that was a surprise to me. I had
yeah,
relied on, the 5 to 7 page essay a few times a
totally.
semester. Uh, and instead assign very short form essays in the class that were highly pressurized. And I think, my intention there was to really challenge the students
Yeah,
with a tight time constraint. Low stakes. Not each one was, it was not worth a ton of points each time, I mean, so there was
sure.
not, that was not where the pressure came. The pressure came
Yeah,
from the sort of like the quick fire challenge on Top Chef or something like that. It was just a very tightly
yeah,
constrained environment to
yeah,
perform well. I would say universally I saw stellar and improve and across the semester improving performance on these short form essays. This is one set of students, 32 students,
sure,
but
sure.
just to share my experience there, I found that
Yeah,
very exciting to watch.
yeah, yeah. Well, to me, and I'm glad you brought that up because I've had my sample size is very small, but what I found, and again, it occurred to me pretty quickly in the classroom that never mind AI. Like there are a lot of students that might be interested in this material, but they just don't want to write, or it's giving them constraints before we even start because there's the anxiety and the pressure. What I found, and again, I'm not saying this is a cure-all, but boy, did it immediately remove AI from the equation by saying, we're going to do all the work in class. You don't have to, I was like, here's the good news. You don't have to write any papers. And I mean, the eyes lit up. And I said, the bad news is you got to come to every class and we're
Right,
going to talk about this stuff. And
right,
and I'm going to grade you on participation. So you don't even have to have that pressure. You don't even
right.
have to give the best answer, but you're going to have to participate. Again, I recognize, especially for secondary school, that's just not going to fly. But um, people lamenting the fact that all my students are using AI to write their papers. I'm like, okay, but that sounds 2023 to me. Like that's not sufficient to me anymore. That we can work around this at least in the short term and find ways to get students to participate and not cheat or feel like those possibilities have now been removed. I think and what I found, like you talk about in your essay, is it wasn't just that it worked because this isn't this. It was more way exceeded the expectations and it did lead to these learning moments and the students teaching the teacher all the cliches applied and
Yeah.
it was very it was very restorative for me.
There are occasions when I've had to write very quickly in a lunch hour or, at a late bedtime hour after my kid goes to sleep. Something that has to go onto the Atlantic's website or, there's not much room for that kind of self-censorship that one feels kick into action when you have like a longer period of time to write. And
Yeah,
I wanted the students to
yeah,
have that kind of freeing experience, actually, where
yeah,
you just have to get it down on the page and 20 minutes later hand it in. And
yeah,
and I think that that's very stressful, but it's also a little liberating because
yeah,
you don't have the time to dally with that super ego that says no, that sentence isn't good, and so
yeah,
it was that again was partly born out of experience. In terms of the AI stuff, you're totally right. I mean, that's on my mind.
yeah,
I the thing that bums me out with the conversations around AI are the fact that it's really increased the trust deficit between students and teachers and administrators. Um,
yeah,
I go into the classroom, and this is as true now as it was 20 years ago, and say, the foundation of our work here is for me to trust you. I'm not going to
yeah,
be looking at your work with the expectation or the suspicion that you might have plagiarized. And I say that very explicitly.
yeah,
And if after that a student finds themselves cheating or using
yeah,
AI in a way that I haven't, condoned. I
sure.
that's a matter of character, and it will come out over time. And I don't know, I don't know what else to say than that.
Right.
Or it's a learning experience, and I'm happy to have that experience with this student.
Totally.
Uh,
So this is probably the only thing I'll say that I might regret, but I feel like as it relates to AI, because I don't have the platform, and I recognize the pressures that professors, trying to get tenure or secondary educators that have to answer to this bureaucracy. But I wonder if whether it comes from our politicians or, our writers, this reminder that if you're able to use AI or whatever other, tool and cheat and you get over and you get the A or whatever, it really is a matter of what are your parents or you paying to attend this class. Like you really are only cheating yourself, and not just in the sense of you're paying to be here to not do the work. That okay, well we can. That's America, baby, right? Like I got one over on the system. Full, that's fine. But believe me, especially in an age of AI, the skills you're not learning in these classes are going to come back to haunt you when you enter the workforce. And again, I don't know how I would convey that more forcefully or how that would land on American consumers' ears, but I wonder if more messaging to parents saying, here's how you can help. Just remind your son or daughter, like it's not even about cheating and morality. This is you really are hurting yourself because the workforce has changed. And if AI can do it, why are they going to pay you to do it worse than AI can do it? And I think that might put the fear of some of this technology in people and maybe get us back on a better path.
it's an opportunity to remember and reaffirm that when we're looking at students as future workers, as future contributors to society,
Yeah.
we're not looking at students as bundles of facts or as bundles of even of skills. We're looking to them as humans who are going to participate in potentially re-envisioning and remaking our society in whatever profession they choose.
Yeah.
And I think that AI has hopefully begun to create a sea change in how we imagine educating students. We're
Yeah.
educating. I don't want to use cliches like the whole student, but that is essentially what we're doing. We're sending somebody out who
Sure.
is not going to impress an employer with a discrete set of um, things that they've learned, but rather a flexible set of capacities to enter into an environment where they can have a transformative effect because in
Yeah.
some to some degree they something about their personhood, their character, their soul, their mind kind of is able to shine forth and excite others. We're training people who are good leaders. We're training people who
Right.
are great at um, coming into a situation where they haven't shared the same experience as the other people around them and loving that and empathizing with others. I mean, all of that, I'm beginning to try to articulate what exactly it is we're now training students to do, but it looks very different than even a few years ago in terms of what we say we're doing, I think. And so my fumbling attempts there are the beginning of a kind of attempt to try to do that.
Yeah, well, and I like that you say the last few years because again, I was more in the camp of lamenting, this seemingly irreversible push towards STEM and again the degradation in terms of funding, in terms of priority, in terms of privilege of the humanities. That was a battle that I knew I'd die on that hill fighting, and I
Yeah.
still will. But
Yeah.
what's been fascinating in the combination of AI and the fact that suddenly it's the STEM classes that are now learning how to code, that might be replaced. I think there's an opportunity there, not to say, therefore, we can go back to the humanities, but rather, so let's really break down what is a humanities education doing and what is it preparing you for? And I think a compelling case has always been made, but now might have more urgency. Being able to multitask, being able to appreciate different perspectives, being able to handle a lot of different thoughts as opposed to maybe a side of your brain that's like becoming specialized in one area. These are life skills. And
Mhm.
again, I think the time, so I'm finding, despite all the things we're talking about, I'm actually finding a new optimism that didn't
Yeah,
exist a few years ago. At least the crack in the window is there to possibly walk through.
absolutely. Absolutely. And I think in my small neck of the woods, what I've been thinking about is less a student who leaves my class able to make an airtight argument about a literary work, just to make this a concrete example for you, Sean,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
more a student who is capable of existing in uncertainty in a productive way, and complexity. A student who is awash in hunches, suppositions, curiosities,
Yeah.
things that may not find their place in a carefully constructed 5 to 7 page essay that comes up with a
Right.
claim. I'm starting to move a little bit away from that. I think we're experiment with the kind of life that we know we're all already living, where we are not sure what the complicated future we're all kind of hustling towards
Yeah.
will cause us to think. And I think, putting a student in the midst of a long novel, asking them to write about it through a certain type of lens. What is it about this book that frustrated you or that felt difficult? Talk about a moment when you weren't sure how to understand it. That kind of request for a student is probably something that will iterate over time in whatever career they do. Well, I don't understand this particular problem that I'm being faced with. I mean, we want those types of thinkers, I would hope. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So here's the $1 million question. You are a poet and a fan of poetry. I am the same,
Hmm.
but another source of genuine optimism is I think maybe 10 years ago, I would have reluctantly, but I would have conceded poetry is becoming increasingly like jazz. It's a niche. There are people that are always going to gravitate toward it, love it, get it, want to specialize in it. But its time, sadly, maybe has passed. I have a radical, and you certainly, I'm still writing poetry, so maybe there's an unacknowledged, self-justification. But no, I really think the concise nature, the quick engagement, it is the ideal time for poetry, both for students, but also the culture. And I know that's your wheelhouse, right? In the writing you do at the Atlantic and as a proselytizer for poetry, period, without any apologies.
It's an incredible period for poetry, and as in many periods in human history, poetry is resurgent, and it's so exciting to read what people so graciously share with me. Whether in the poetry inbox that they send to, or personally, if it happens to be
Yeah.
somebody I know who's writing poetry, it's just very thrilling to see how a period of technological change, a period of political uncertainty,
Yeah.
turbulence, violence, a period of, I would say, a kind of relief that the trends of postmodernism or the trends of the kind of nonfiction memoir writing that has been popular, in a more recent period. These kinds of encumbrances or albatrosses around the necks of young writers, they don't feel very heavy right now. I think that people are writing in ways that are experimental, fun, interesting, and I think people are leaving behind a little bit that sense that they have to pay homage to their immediate literary precursors, as it
Yeah.
were. So it's a freeing time, and part of that has to do with the proliferation of of small magazines, of publishing opportunities. I know, how difficult it is to get your work into print, how challenging a sense of how challenging that landscape is, how
Yeah.
severe some of the gatekeeping can seem, and can
Yeah.
be. Uh, I hope and I feel that this is a period where, and I'm speaking as somebody who participates in that. Of course, as having to select things is both a delightful and disturbing and demoralizing process, because one has to also turn things down constantly. But I
Yeah.
but I but I do see so much more, and I read so much more out there, and I get the sense that young voices are being encouraged. I certainly want to participate in that encouragement. I it is top of my mind every day to try to look at what MFA students are writing. I get sometimes college and high school students occasionally. Those are people who I want to make sure they know that I'm reading their work. I try to respond as much as I can when I can. It just feels like we're awash in beautiful poetry right now, and I'm as excited as you are, Sean, about that. Yeah.
I really appreciate that insight and that commentary. I'll take it a step further and say again, trying to separate my own kind of writerly ambitions and practices. I do think we are literally living through a moment that hindsight will make much clearer. In ways, although of course I'm still an advocate for the novel. Everything we've already talked about, like enough
Right.
said. But I think poetry itself as a form is responding to Twitter, is responding to the bombardment, right, of 24 now news is infotainment 24/7 and perhaps even the most well-intended what I went through while in my own life, which again I offer this because I think I'm probably not alone here. It's not that I stopped writing fiction or don't want to write fiction or even political essays, which I used to do a lot of, but I feel like the shelf life in the Trump era anyway is already like, even if I make the most persuasive argument, like there's going to be a new outrage that makes this. But poetry, I think, stands alone as having the opportunity to engage with current events, to comment and respond in ways that, as a former grad student, you would take a text that could be a year or 100 years old and engage with it and make an argument and kind of assert your control. That's an old school process that I love and remember fondly. But I think poetry now is doing that on a more immediate kind of street level. And the barrier to entry, and I say this as someone that judges young poetry anthologies, the
Yep.
barrier to entry is almost non-existent. And so on a cultural kind of societal aesthetic level, there's something so wonderful about that. In my own modest way, I'm definitely trying to put a flare under that so that we
Yeah.
can get a bigger, like it's already happening without me or my enthusiasm, which is awesome. But I think putting some oxygen on that, I think is going to give us even more vistas to see how the young people really are a lot smarter and sensitive and intelligent, and humane than we might realize.
Absolutely. That's so well put. Poetry is, in any period that you read it, so attuned to small changes in language that as the kinds of developments that you laid out, for example, social media like Twitter, or simply changes in the way we use slang or the way we speak to each other, um, or more abstract changes in technical terms and vocabularies. I mean, poetry is a magpie that picks those up and is able somehow wonderfully to incorporate it into its compressed net
Yes.
of forms. And the novel is this baggy monster, famously,
Right.
that can hold up a microscope to society or a mirror to society at any given form, and it's wonderful, and I think will last forever for that reason. Poetry does something kind of similar, though, on the level of language. It's so carefully attuned to the small changes in verbal expression, and so open to it. And poetry is a the gates of poetry are always open to changes in language. They're not. Yeah, and that's what's one of the fascinating. It's as fascinating to look at it in Shakespeare as it is in the present period. I think it's a wonderful capacity that poetry has.
Yeah, I calls to mind Charles Mingus, the jazz musician, is one of my heroes, and he has a great quote that I might butcher, but it's basically like, "I'm trying to play the truth of who I am. The challenge is that I'm changing all the time." And I feel
Hmm
like right now, poetry is best able to parry with that. We're all changing all the time. Fundamentally, right? We're the same, and I think that's what your experience. We can read Tolstoy and realize, wow, these same pressures, the same societal, bureaucratic nonsense from Kafka. But poetry seems more adept and agile in terms of tracking this in real time. So it's really valuable, like on a almost kind of anthropological level.
Well, poetry has these genres that are essentially kind of social situations. The elegy is, you
Yes.
lose somebody. The ode, you witness something spectacular that you would need to look at from a set of different perspectives over time.
Yeah.
Um, a- a- you know, these types of we're not talking necessarily about a form like the sonnet or the sestina. We're talking about one level
Yeah,
up where you have
yeah,
these kinds of, you know, categories of poetry that plug into social needs and functions.
yeah,
And because our social needs and functions persist over time, we have ceaseless innovation and reinvention of these particular genres for that reason. We always have elegies. We're always sadly missing or losing folks in our lives. And so there's something wonderfully um, resilient about these poetic genres because of the way they immediately touch upon these lived social experiences that we have. Even a lyric poem that's just addressed to somebody else. Now we're getting close to Valentine's Day, so it's a good thing to bring up. I mean, there's this
yeah,
kind of you know, that relation between the I and the you. Even that is a kind of attempt to find verbal and literary support for a social need or function. And I think
yeah.
that's something that really draws me to poetry is looking at um, the ways in which poets meet those needs that are always there socially. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, right on. I love resiliency is such a perfect word for poetry, and I think my exuberance I think comes from often hearing whether it's jazz music or poetry dismissed as that's old fashioned, and it's like sticking with poetry, that actually is factually untrue, and you might be blown away if you
Yeah.
read a younger or even older poet writing in today. And I'm This is a rabbit hole, but I've even found, Walt, in my reading stuff that moved me to tears in college. I have the nostalgic fondness and what I learned and can still take from it. But poetry from another century seems increasingly jarring to me and formal, where the new poetry is really speaking to me. And again, I didn't feel that way as a college student. I felt, these old souls that understood the world, and there was this beautiful connection to distant times. I feel like for me with poetry, very general statement, but for me with poetry, it's this immediacy, and maybe that's why I'm just so excited about it because I can actually point to my own reading and how it's changed and how language itself works for me in ways it didn't used to work and vice versa.
Makes a ton of sense to me. And I think I go through similar days and weeks when I feel that way too. And then suddenly I'm reading a Shakespeare sonnet and I think, oh, this is the thing that I need right now. Or I'm
Yeah,
reading, you know, a poem by Wallace Stevens from the early part of the 20th century. Or, I teach a lot of Gwendolyn Brooks from the mid 20th century. And that's not old stuff. But it is stuff that's not
yeah,
in our immediate contemporary period.
sure.
My regular diet is very contemporary stuff, written last week or today or things like that. So
Right.
I uh, I do share your sense of excitement about uh, being a contemporary of the person writing and of the work being written. That's something that's thrilling. It feels like touching a live wire.
Yes, Livewire. Well, I mean, we've already covered it, but again, I wouldn't be happy if I didn't also acknowledge a piece that you wrote last summer, an analog solution for mindful living. It's about poetry and quote, it tracks our most important data, but not with the intention of creating an optimized version of a human. I just want to tell you, I adore that sentence. And while we have covered that, please feel free to opine a little bit more about what you're getting at there. And how this really is it's a doorway that does apply to all people because it's not a fix, right? It's because it's this ephemeral, timeless. Like it's not claiming that if you do this you'll lose weight or you'll get more money. It's like here's where the arts come in and say this could change your life for the better, but it might not. And it's like, do you want to play? And I think your writing makes a case for that. So again, I want to celebrate that. But that line in particular um, also feels very important in 2026.
Thanks, John. And I think poetry shares with our wellness industry a desire to reflect on and meditate on how we're doing it day to day. What
Yeah.
it doesn't share, and what I think it makes it very important, is this desire for optimizing the self. And Gia Tolentino has written about this beautifully, but I think
Yeah.
we live in a moment when there's this relentless desire to optimize, to make more efficient. Those are not values. Those
Yeah.
those couldn't be farther from solutions for the good life or
Right.
answers for what the good life is. Those
Yeah.
are I think, quite frankly, terrible. I don't. I think it's certainly true that as somebody with a 2-year-old and as somebody who works, you know, in a dean's office as a professor and as an editor, I am trying to optimize my time. I'm not saying that, but I think to
Right.
think of the self as something that can be optimized is 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 uh, um, is just not using the right term for thinking about how we grow
Yeah.
and learn and understand. I think if anything, as we get more experienced in our lives, in our loves, our friendships, we grow less able to optimize things because everything becomes more complicated and more enchanting for that reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah.
Well, and I can't help but kind of chuckle at it. There's a full circle moment here where I have talked about how it's probably not the best sales pitch to say, read poetry because it'll enrich you, because that's what we heard in the 20th century.
Right.
But what we're really coming around to is not reaffirming that so much as saying, if you're still unhappy, a lot of these quick fixes in whatever form they're coming, pills, commercials, etc., if you're seeing that those aren't working, maybe it's worth asking rhetorically and investigating, why does this work, and why do the people that have art in their lives seem more empathetic, seem more curious, seem more happy? And it's an invitation, and that's the thing I think I push back against that. Well, if you know how to read poetry, or you've joined an exclusive club, whatever, right? It's like, no, this
Right.
is what all art wants, is to
Right.
bring more people to the table. And dead artists, this is my conviction, right? Like, nothing would make the dead artist happier than to say people are still reading and responding to my work. That's why I wrote it. Fame and fortune is great. We all need to pay the bills, but I wrote this so I could be in conversation, and to be in conversation with people that weren't alive when I was alive. That's about as deep as it gets.
If there's a single thing that I think ties together what I've wanted to do across the last 20 years, it's make sure that poetry gets to a larger set of readers who don't feel that impediment from jumping into a poem, that kind of sense of this is for an exclusive group. I would love to be able to continue what I do for the sole reason of making poetry more widely available for people, because I think it's an essential part of human life to read words put together in a meaningful pattern that sometimes make music, that sometimes make conversation. And
Yeah,
I think that it 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 distresses me when I hear that people find difficulty getting into poetry. It
yeah,
distresses me because I totally understand why that's been the case. And I put together this little anthology for the Atlantic of American poetry of the last 168 years. That's not poetry that will be difficult for people to read. You can dip into it,
yeah,
read a line, read a poem. It's musical, it's thoughtful, it goes all over the place in terms of geography. Um, and I'm on the lookout always for poems that can speak to our our incredibly wide and diverse country.
yeah,
Um, and I guess my sole desire as an academic and as an editor and as a reader is to share poetry with others. I mean, like, I don't mean to sound like such a
yeah. No,
Pollyanna, but
it's
I do think it's possible. Yeah.
totally. And I mean, look, I can't help myself. We as a country contain multitudes, always
Yeah.
have, and what better fields to plow than poetry, to see how people have been in conversation with each other, the country, the future. And you're being too modest. remind people watching, how many poems did you read when you were putting that anthology together? Because I know the
Oh
answer.
yeah, I mean, you look. So imagine this is January 2024, and I was on the night shift for my infant, and there he is. He's sleeping. I'm reading old issues of the. I mean, we're talking probably around 8 or 9,000. I didn't keep track. I did keep track, but I didn't keep accurate count.
Yeah,
Yeah. So to cull 100 of those was a challenge. It was a was a Herculean feeling task.
sure.
But yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
But
right,
fun,
and
a fun one. Yeah.
it's excruciating and it's challenging work to effectively spread the message. But I think what we've made clear today in our own ways and many of our ilk are trying to combine bringing enlightenment, again with very gentle touch, but genuine enlightenment. Not that we're providing it, but showing a pathway. But I think what we're lacking is this confidence and exuberance of here's the good news, right? We're not selling
Yeah.
you anything there's no magic. Because there's no magic, that's why it's magic, is that
Right.
it's not trying to do anything other than meet you where you are and have you start asking questions. And I think, that is one reason we see the arts forever under assault, because the last thing certain forces want are people that are curious and empathetic and able to connect dots culturally and historically. So we're also fighting against that generational apathy.
Completely. Yeah, you put it beautifully. Yeah.
So I think parting shot. What do we have more poetry? Have you had time to work on your own poetry? Is that a constant work in progress? What are we seeing from you besides more awesome essays?
No, I'm sure you feel that. I'm sure you feel this too. It's sort of if I could only just have a little bit more time to write.
Yeah.
I've been working on a few new poems. I've been trying to get into a practice of noting things and describing things. That's always the start for me. I've been reading Thoreau's journals. I've been, so trying to rev back up into some writing habits that, finishing the book and doing the editorial work have put to the side a little bit. But yeah, the next thing that I'm hoping to do is, finish that second book of poems. And I'm working on that now. So
Right on. Well,
yeah,
I came into 2026 and it's probably been this way for the last 30 years of my life, but 2026, I was like, aside from, health and happiness and living, trying to be a good person, read more and write more. And it's like same as it ever was. And
right.
I find that, exhausting and liberating. And I think it's that push and pull why it's probably clear to anyone watching, whether we're deluded or not, we love what we do and why we want to share it, because it's not an exclusive club. It's actually a club that we want to make bigger because it makes it better for everybody.
And I just want to return and along exactly those lines to one thing that I said in the essay, which is there may be plenty of reasons to despair over the present. The literature classroom, the act of reading literature, this does not have to be one of them. We should shout it from the rooftops. I mean, this is one of the great, great things about being a non-optimized human being is just the sheer joy of being able to share things that we've read that are beautifully written.
Yeah.
Yep. So
Well said. Well, I mean, that's a great note to end on. Again, I want to thank you again for the work that you do in the classroom, in the pages of the Atlantic and elsewhere. And we need heroes. We need sources of inspiration. I need you to hear that if it wasn't abundantly clear, your writing and your advocacy is exactly the type of energy that I needed. So I'm just really grateful to the work you do, and I hope you're able to keep doing it.
it's been so great to talk to you, Sean. And thank you so much for having me today. I really, really have enjoyed the conversation and just feeling the rapport with you. So thanks so much.
My pleasure. We'll speak again soon, hopefully. Thank you for checking out Some Things Considered, folks. Walt Hunter, check him out at the Atlantic, and subscribe to the Atlantic. The writing, it actually, I will say this as a longtime subscriber. We see the Washington Post. We see a lot of unfortunate things. The Atlantic just keeps raising the bar. So subscribe to the Atlantic, support the arts, get involved. Let me know what you think, and we'll see you soon. Be safe and be well.
Thanks again.
Thanks for tuning in to Some Things Considered. Find out more, including how to be a guest, at seanmurphy.net. Reminder, We are obsessed with story and celebrating creativity. Also, we're here to advocate for the arts by any means necessary. Drop us a line, get involved, and support our creatives who are the lifeblood of our culture. I'm Sean Murphy. See you on the next episode of Some Things Considered.